There used to be a psychological contract, which is really just this unspoken, here's what I'm going to put in, and here's what you're going to give me for the work I do. And it used to be more relational in nature. There was a commitment to the organization and its goals for the long term. And they gave everything to that company, and that company somewhat gave back some things, but never really as much as what you would expect from a lifetime of service. I think that's when you first realized that it was broken. Even when contract was more relational, there was still this sense that you will give me everything and I will give you some things, and you will be happy with that because you're not going to get much better. When you have meaning and you have people who are finding the meaning in your organization, then your company will tend to perform better, partially because you just have more engaged employees and more connected sense of energy going towards the company's goal.
Okay, we're here with Greg Barnett. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Drew. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Hey, maybe for the audience, could you just take a minute to introduce yourself and what it is you do and how you made it to Chief People Scientist at Energage?
Yeah, great. So my background is in industrial organizational psychology. I'm about 20 plus years in the field, having worked through every little nuance you can imagine. It's with assessments, leadership development, culture, engagement, employee experience, performance management, you name it. And through those different experiences, just had the chance to work with big companies, small companies, leaders, people of all shapes and sizes to understand what the work world looks like through different lenses, especially as they apply to using different tools. Currently, my role is Chief People Scientist at Energage. And Energage is a company that has two sides to it. One of them is we run the top workplace recognition program, so that their largest provider of culture and employee experience recognition awards comes from our company. They're called Top Workplace Awards. We do ours regionally. So a lot of people are used to other versions of these that go through like Forbes or Fortune. Those are the national awards. We do ours at a regional level. So we work with thousands of companies every year to assess them and see the state of their culture. And then on the Energage side, that's the SaaS part of the company where we analyze the data, understand what great looks like. And for my role as a Chief People Scientist, it's largely about seeing what's going on in the world, looking at data, helping build a better product, helping to get our stories that we do outside to other people to understand what these great companies are doing to really harness their value propositions, their brands to the world, and bring in the best talent, and then get the best out of them and create great places to really be and work. So that's what I currently do, and it's a lot of fun.
Great. So curious, as somebody with your perspective, right? You've been in this space for your whole career, essentially. What are some of the major trends popping up right now when it comes to employee engagement or getting the most out of the people that work for you?
Yeah, so some of the most important trends right now as we're moving through post-pandemic, post-Great Resignation, into seeing how these worlds solidify. I think number one, just very meta, is the employee experience is a focus. And the employee experience is a bit of a departure from the world of just kind of culture and employee engagement. And it focuses really, as it sounds like, on the entire end-to-end experience that an employee has when working in a company. So it has to do with what culture is, but it also has to do with what did they experience before they even started the company as a candidate? How was their onboarding? What's it like 1 year in? When they get promoted, what's the experience like? Is it good? Is it bad? And so forth. And so the idea of employee experience is increasingly more of a focus in organizations, almost to the point where a recent study showed there were 2 of the fastest growing 10 jobs in the entire US economy across the last 5 years. Number 6 is an employee experience manager. And so just that concept is much more important in companies. Number 2 on that list, which would be another key thing that I see a lot of trends around that are more meta, is around HR analytics or people analytics. Increasingly, the use of data, which in the past was really used to describe and understand your culture or the personalities of the people you work with, or is becoming a critical piece in which companies are actually evaluating the sort of data that comes in, whether it's from employee feedback, performance, hard data like absences, things like that. It's all being harnessed to really start to predict real business outcomes or even talent outcomes, but at scale. And I would say that is a real shift into a mindset that is really giving HR and the broader world more skin in the game, that they can do meaningful things that really can measurably have an impact on business success. And so that's another meta trend. So those are two meta trends. More nuanced, I would say this just right now, it's a lot of push and pull around what the future of the workplace looks like through the lens of things that have been going on, such as schedule flexibility and things like that. Workday being 4 days. Is that a real thing? Is that not? How to make a truly hybrid work organization. People are hedging back to going back on site. Some companies are holding true. Where's it all going to play out? So I think that's the other component and it's tied in with well-being and employee balance and those things that continues to be really top of mind. I probably covered a lot there, didn't I?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. We're going to dive into a couple of those topics, especially the predicting outcomes and the shift to understanding human analytics. Before we get to that, a lot of what you're talking about, even like those micro trends, is very much the topic du jour lately. Pandemic accelerated a lot of these trends, but I think it more so exacerbated trends that were already happening. And there's a lot of tension right now with what's happening with the economy and tech layoffs. And whenever this happens, I think the mistrust or the tension that exists between the employee and employer really is exposed. And I've gone as far to say that I think the employee-employee relationship is broken. It really hasn't been that great since it was ever really started since the Industrial Revolution. But what do you make of that statement and what do you attribute to your beliefs?
Yeah, so the employee-employer relationship being broken, I believe that it has always been broken because of just the nature of psychological contract that's always existed. If you go back not too far, because I don't want to take us too deep, but even as like the 80s, there used to be a psychological contract, which is really just this unspoken, here's what I'm going to put in, and here's what you're going to give me for the work I do. And it used to be more relational in nature. And so when it was relational, it was more about when we talk about people being in it for the long term, there was a commitment to the organization and its goals for the long term. And so that's why a lot of times when we look back at people who were at a place their whole career and they gave everything to that company and that company somewhat gave back some things, but never really as much as what you would expect from a lifetime of service. I think that's when you first realize that it was broken, at least for me, is even when contract was more relational, there was still this sense that you will give me everything and I will give you some things. And you will be happy with that because you're not going to get much better. And second, probably because you are working in a world where this is what's expected, to stay with a company for a long time. Now there's a big shift, which I think is maybe shining a brighter light on it, which is the psychological contract is now more transactional and it works in different ways. It's on the one hand, companies are more thinking about hiring for things they need done in many ways. And that's where you see the rise of sometimes gig economy work and things like that. It's a much bigger focus on here's what we need to get done. The employees are also becoming more transactional. And here's what I need to get back. And in doing so, it highlights a kind of, I think, before where it was a little more ingrained in this long relationship. Now it's been shortened to more tangible measurement. And so right now, I think you can see these transactional differences much more like in front of your face. And so that's where you're starting to see. So I think it's always been broken, but I think in recent times, the transactional nature of what's the sort of the balancing equation. I'm giving X, you're giving Y, and I'm measuring this relationship in terms of these things is really creating more awareness of how those things are out of whack, where the organization has a lot of needs and the employees are like, wait a minute, I have some needs. And I'm trying to balance those transactional needs, and those needs are being and flexibility and career growth. But I need these things. And now it's being, because you can now more converse and you're seeing it more that on the surface, you're seeing the misalignment between the two much stronger. And that's where I think why it's more obvious that it's broken is it's easier to see it when you can look at the two line items and be like, these aren't even. And in the past, it was like, well, I don't know, I'm supposed to be here for a long time. So I'm going to be here forever. So I only am going to get what I can get from this one company. And so that's where I think it's really shining bright now.
Yeah, no, and that's a really salient point too, about because the nature of this psychological contract is being shrunk, right? That there's an imperative more almost to measure those transactions and value what those transactions look like between the employee and the employer. And then that leads me to only exacerbating this, right? Here on this show, we talk about the phenomena that as machines continue to take on more transactional and objective components of work, right? Whether that's AI or robotics or automation, it's leaving humans to tackle the more relational or subjective components, which could maybe be at odds with this transactional thinking, right? And for instance, right now, we're all talking about it, right? The major disruptions with AI and Chat GPT. So in your view, in a world where humans are left to do the things that robots can't, what are humans doing?
So it's funny you should ask, but when I look at AI coming in and robotics have already been a part of this, where can people find comfort and excitement in their futures in a way? And I've been thinking about it as, I think there's a long curve on this, but in the shorter term, I think the first part is it's an opportunity for organizations and employees to actually use AI to humanize their own roles. When I say that, it's really the idea that like when you you use AI to take care of the mind-numbing stuff that you don't want to do, the repetitive work, you give people a chance to use what makes them people and what they bring uniquely to the table: creativity, relationships, problem solving, strategic thinking. There's more time and energy that they can actually devote to what makes them special versus doing everything that's rote and repetitive that really does kill their jobs and their own kind of sense of meaning in what they do. I'll use an example because I think with ChatGPT, and I've developed some Python programs in the last couple of months just to learn how the AI world works. And there are a couple of times, even here at Energage, where someone has said, here's an issue that clients are asking. That issue is, for example, can we skip a year of surveying? And instead of me writing the same thing that I've already written before, I used GPT-4 to give me a starting point with 10 bullet points. And I sent it on to somebody and said, this is good enough. Why don't you rewrite it in our tone? But I didn't spend all this time writing something I've already written before. I was able to be free to do something else that was more meaningful, like work on strategy of our product, for example. And I just thought I do worry a little when people see it like, why do we need Greg around if we can just do this? But I also think that's the fear factor. The positive factor is I was able to spend my time doing something more meaningful than just writing out a few bullet points. So I think at scale, there's a real opportunity for companies to harness this world and lean in soon and understand how they can use this to actually free their people to not only do maybe better things for the company, but also to get rid of the things that create disengagement, that create lack of meaning, that create burnout, and give them a chance to spend that time connecting with people and talking ideas and being creative versus just doing. And so that's where my short-term view on a lot of it.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And in your line of work, I'm curious to get your perspective, right? As you were just saying, it's freeing you up to, I don't have to do this. So you are free to do more strategic work. I'm going to venture to guess it might be work that is more meaningful to you and would make you feel more satisfied. As humans, I think we yearn to find work that aligns with our values, and we want to be with others who share that. Some have shared with me when I share that thought, by the way, that they don't believe meaningful work exists, that we're all just working to make a buck. Do you think workers are yearning for meaningful work? And if so, what do you think meaningful work is?
What is meaningful work and does it exist? I will say that I think that some of it depends on, yes, I believe that there's meaning in everything we do at work, but sometimes it requires reflecting to find it versus it being obvious and in front of your face. So from experience, I work with some convenience store companies. And I have the privilege or the pain of reading thousands of comments. One of the questions we ask is, in some way or another, is what could help you find more meaning in your job? Or on the other hand, if they're very positive, what gives you meaning? And it's fascinating because you will find similar people with similar backgrounds working in convenience stores. One person will write, what do you mean? I sell cigarettes and gas and stuff to people. There's no meaning. And on the same company, in the same region, someone will write, I'm able to make people's days just a little bit better every day. And my customers often leave happy and satisfied. And I know that I played a small but important part in their roles. And so when I see that, I guess I say there is meaning to be found, but sometimes it helps to have people first help you understand where the meaning might be. And second, then there's a personal question of, does that meaning mean anything to me? So there's the element of, are you aware and thinking about meaning? And if you're seeking for it, if you're looking for it, you may not be aware of where the meaning is supposed to exist. So that's helpful. The other side of it is just people have different values and motivations and drives in life. And so one person's meaning may not be another person's meaning. And so that if you go through life thinking that all work is meaningless, I think part of that is you haven't reflected on what meaning would mean to you. And on the other hand, it may not be the roles that you're in, the kinds of things you're doing may not necessarily deliver to you the kinds of things that you value and that you're going to align with in any sort of positive way. So I do think that's my views, that there is meaning in all work, but it takes some time sometimes to find it. And when you get down to these hourly roles where some of what you do feels very transactional and feels very much just for the paycheck, it's hard to take the time to care enough to find the meaning.
There's a reason why some businesses have realized, I need to figure this out. I need to figure out if my people have meaning. I'm going to venture to guess there's some incentive, right? Whether it's monetary or otherwise. Could you maybe just speak to our audience about what does a business stand to gain from understanding whether or not their employees see meaning in work and what that materializes as value to the business?
Yeah, and meaning is one of the critical components to employee engagement. It's a critical component to when we work with top workplaces. Really, one of the things that when it lacks, you don't get the hearts and minds of people pouring into your organization in terms of their passion, their energy, et cetera. So you don't get the positive side of emotional energy that you need to be a productive, performing company. And so over and time again in our own work, meaning is one of those top correlates of employee engagement. And whenever you know that, it points out that when people feel that there's meaning in their roles, they have the tendency to show much more discretionary effort, to go above and beyond their basic job responsibilities and bring more ideas, energy, whatever to the work. And full stop, when you have meaning and you have people who are finding the meaning in your organization, then your company will tend to perform better, partially because you just have more engaged employees and more connected sense of energy going towards the company's goal.
And are we just talking like a little better, a lot better? Do you have any data you could share?
I would say that it's probably a lot better, but I work with a lot of companies who don't come in and compete for being a top workplace unless they've got some of this stuff as table stakes, right? Yeah. And so for the companies I work with, this probably doesn't answer your question, but where we see the differentiator is that these companies have figured out largely alignment toward mission, values, and meaning, appreciating and respecting and psychological safety of their people, learning, growth, and development. If anywhere they're more challenged, it's around the business, creating conditions where people can feel successful. So like in the top cultures, it's like we've got all the feel-good personal stuff, right? But are we making good decisions? Are we enabling our people to perform? Is there good cooperation? Is the communication strong? So that's what we see as the major differentiator, whereas meaning tends to be pretty good. One thing I would call out, though, is we also see that as people feel more burnt out and more stressed, meaning drops away. And so sometimes when people think about meaningful work, they're thinking of this concept that meaningful work is all about having this purpose-driven organization, which I think is great. But what we also see is as people respond to why they're not finding meaning, a large part of it is they're stuck in a rut, they're doing repetitive work, they're stressed out, they're burning out, they have no chance to step outside what they do. There might be meaning to be found, but they're lost in a sea of mediocre work experience. And so it is that part where I think there's this sense of great meaning and this higher order meaning, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
But the real thing is, for a lot of employees, is that they can find meaning in what they do, whether it's meaning because they're growing, meaning because they're helping people, meaning because they're contributing to a better company. All of that drops away when they just feel like they're doing a job, period. And I think that's the real problem or challenge companies face with meaning.
Your question on burnout just triggered for me. I don't know if you saw the last week's news cycle, Wall Street Journal's latest report on, I guess you could talk about it as like macro level engagement, but they had this stat that has changed since they last ran this report on how much do employees think that working hard materializes is worth it. And on average, it was like in their last report, it was like in the mid% of respondents said that, yes, they think working hard is like good work ethic is important. It brings you things in life. And since then, that stat has dropped to like the mid 60s or even lower. It's like a 13-point drop, I think. Your burnout thought just triggered that for me. When it comes to that discretionary effort, which is working hard, what do you make of a stat like that when, hey, we're getting burned out and we're not feeling that we're working as hard? Is this like a generational thing? We just don't care about work? Or do you think it's more so because we're burned out that we're not seeing the value here because I'm just going to get laid off?
Yeah. The decline in people feeling like putting more effort leads to better results is declining. It brings me to this. There's this thing that's called the just world hypothesis. And it's a social psychological term, but that in general, when you put in more in anything, you'd expect to get back what you put in return. I think that what is changing is what people expect in return. So whereas we're traditionally and generationally, but I hate doing straight generational pieces, sure, but it used to be like, look, I put in so that I can have job security, period. Like all this energy is to make sure I have a job and a career at a company. Going back to the psychological contract of long-term relationship with this company, I'm an IBM person. And that was the exchange. I think as time has gone on and in more recent times, what we're seeing is what I want back is less of the material things in some ways and more of the things that make my life more balanced, if you will. I think balance is my term that covers it. Yeah. I need to have the ability to take care of myself, take care of my family. So I think what we're seeing is maybe a change in the expectations of what hard work are meant to get you. Mm-hmm. And the issue is those things like more money, more salary, more pay, more career are becoming somewhat devalued because, again, transactionally, they don't last very long.
Right.
Like we've seen the COVID, what people laid off. People are experiencing companies who the terms like quiet hiring, where it's I'll just use you to solve a short-term problem because the labor market is short, so you can help me out. But what do I get back from it? So I would say that it's just like generationally, there's more awareness about what do I get out needs to be about balance that helps me. So we're seeing that shift to maybe a new set of values, if you will.
Yeah, that's really profound, right? It's like almost like materialism is waning a bit in light of this.
I think I watch it. I think we see it. You probably see it with other people when you just work personally. Mm-hmm. But I came from a world where I look at it as a 60-hour work week. That's just what you do. That's how you get ahead. And I think that the leadership of today is probably people who still believe that, but we're becoming lesser of us in charge. Mm-hmm. And so on top of it, we're starting to see more awareness from an early kind of a younger generation that starts to value that, like putting in 60 hours, 70 hours, burning both ends of the candle, getting back in touch immediately is not the way they have got ahead. Yeah. And so we're seeing like, whereas I got ahead, it was, I had to work harder than the other person. Mm-hmm. And I think where it's changing is not getting ahead. It's getting ahead actually is being redefined as living your better life, if you will. Yeah. And that's the shift. So it's less, look at you, Mr. Accomplished. So there's almost a value of, so what? Are you able to balance your life? Do you have good mental health? That's where the exchange has changed to that now versus how we came up probably.
Sure. Yeah. Are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. And you just brought up something around like the values. And then if we think about what's happening with the proliferation of technology, right? Definitely the younger generations entering the workforce today are going to benefit from having different skills than you or I have. And then they must probably also be in alignment with their own values. When you think about the next generation of workers and all that's happening, what kinds of skills and competencies do you think are going to be really coveted in the future?
I will start with one thing that I'm concerned with. And I do think it's not a question of judgment. It's a question of how much will relationship building skills, social skills, presentation skills, even deep research skills be needed in the future? So that's question one, because if you look at how a lot of people interact today, it's changed dramatically. I have kids in college and younger kids, and they're all pretty happy hanging out on their phones. There was a class that was recently offered at a university, which was public speaking, but on Zoom. And when I see those moments, I realize it's like, there's two questions. One of them is, in my world, in the current world, there still seems to be a premium on, or there used to be a premium on things like building relationships, getting in front of people, influencing them through social interaction. But as the work world is more remote, as technology and interactions are asynchronous, like Slack, as presentations are now via Zoom or even video, informally recorded Vimeo or Vidyard, it's my natural inclination would be to say there's going to be a need for these skills, and there's a gap because there's a different way in which people are interacting and growing. But I don't know that businesses aren't adapting in some ways as well, to where the skills that are needed today are unlikely to be the same ones. So I guess it's a way of saying, I don't know, because I live in a world where a lot of the things that I would expect that you need to be successful are not necessarily, and I know there's a gap coming, but I don't know for sure whether those things are really be perceived as a gap in the future, or if they'll just be the way business gets done.
I tend to believe that there's cyclicality. So what's old will become new again. And so I was having a conversation with a seasoned and tenured head of sales, and we were talking about if there's going to be AI and automation, and you're going to be able to automate and program a lot of my follow-ups and the touch bases and all the mundane, tedious stuff about driving a sales process, then does that mean that like field sales will come back? And in my view, I was like, it very well could. You could have 300 accounts, right? And you have workflow automation to help you do everything else. And then if every other company has that, then your only differentiator is going to be, it's back to you and that personal relationship. I don't know, what do you think? Because that's maybe a bit at conflict with your thought.
What I hope is that, back to one of the things we were talking about earlier, which is AI as a chance to humanize, right?
Yep.
To let you free yourself from the constraints of the mundane and to step up with you, what makes you unique, whether that is you're really social or you're really creative, or maybe you're really thoughtful, or maybe you're just really good at details. Like whatever it is, can AI give you a chance to stand out? I think the answer is it will. What I don't know, where I'm wonder is just what will the business of sometimes businesses, when they get a hold of this AI, the question I have is, given their track record, organizations' track record on really celebrating the employee and their spirit, which I don't think is a great track record. I think there are great companies out there, but I think a lot of them go through a period of growth where when they get to a certain size, everybody's a replaceable widget at some point. And so I guess the question I'm wondering will be is, yes, we're able to harness what makes people special better. And in a case of like sales, yes, we have much more, the follow-ups are all tailored and amazing. The differentiator may be the individual salesperson that brings their unique personality, their unique style, their unique tenacity to the deal that makes the difference. But will organizations wait around to do that?
Right.
Or will they go to the lowest common denominator? I've already seen, I think we've both seen it in SaaS sales, where a lot of the SaaS sales is to take off as much as the personality of the individual as you can in a way and have run them a pretty straight playbook, right? Don't talk too much. We're recording how much you talk. Oh, you ask too many questions, bad. You let them talk too long, bad. Here's what you do when they say this. And that seems to be a preferred style, which takes away some of the uniqueness of the people already. I wonder if organizations, my hope is they will take this as an opportunity to let people extend their skills and what makes them special. Sure. My fear is left to their own devices of things like efficiency in cost reduction will they, and maybe just to throw in, and the fact that the employees are more demanding today in terms of the leverage, if they won't see this as an opportunity to say, we can do all of this, maybe not as great, but we can do all this without dealing with this tax, this human tax that's so complicated and so tricky.
Yeah. Loving this train of thought. I'm going to ask you one more question down here, and then we'll go to, I need to get your point of view on performance measurement. But you just triggered this for me, which is, I think sales is one of those areas that is good to make this analogy. I look at a lot of sales process as very analogous to the assembly line worker of yesteryear, right? There's a process. There's only one, the line comes to you, you put on the things you're supposed to do. The better you are at doing what the machine can't, then the more the assembly line, the smoother it can run and the more output we will have. That was done in a time that economists, that is not the knowledge economy, very much the doing economy. And so I've been having this debate with economists lately about, there was a time where we reached the 50s or 60s and we're now we're in the knowledge economy. And it's okay. So forever we're in the knowledge economy. But really what we're saying, if curious to get your thoughts, is the sales thing is that's the blue collar work of today. Mm-hmm. And so is it that we're in a knowledge economy, or actually have we been going little cycles through a knowledge economy, a doing economy, a knowledge economy, doing economy, with every big technological platform shift that we've had? What are your thoughts on that? Is it that we're in a knowledge economy and that it's all knowledge work, or is this work actually analogous to blue collar work of before?
Thinking about the shift of knowledge economy into a doer economy, right? And how does the future hold potentially with the innovations of AI and automation, even in terms of all the aspects of it? I think that we will enter, I guess I will step back and say, one person I work with said the greatest job you will be able to have in the long future is to be the product manager of an AI product. And I got what that point is that you are on top of the product, designing what it will do. And I think what we will see in sales, for example, is that we will mature, and we already have, the tools will mature, but synthesizing what tools, when, where, how to use them best will be a human decision. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be the interplay of, we are going to follow this playbook. Now we're going to get a new set of tools. And right now it's so early. Those tools they're going to change from building the PowerPoint deck for you, recording the video for you. But at some point, that's going to become, again, it's not going to stand out. Yeah. Everybody's going to be running the same playbook. They're all going to have the same. And so the human input will then be back to a knowledge input of,
that's right,
test and iterate. Let's see what way we can combine these things. Let's pull back some things. And that's going to be where we'll see, I think, a layer of intelligence, human intelligence being required. Mm-hmm. And then it'll all get documented again. And then it'll become the standard for a while until that happens again. And so I do agree that we will go through a period of reestablishing a set of mechanism, processes, and steps using AI and automation to run the sales playbook differently. And this first will take a human to do it. Then it'll be on autopilot in a way. Right. Then it'll shift back over into, we're not differentiating. Everybody's doing this. So now we've got to step back and reorder and reorganize and try some new things. And that's when the human will come back in. Yep. Only question might be is, how many humans will there be needed to work on said project, right? Will it be less and less until you've got, I heard of something recently called a chat GPT whisperer. Yeah. And they're being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to write the prompts. Yeah. So it's a question of, will there be the sales whisperer who's, look, you don't actually talk to anyone. You whisper to the technology in a way that it ups its game, right? I don't know, but it's where I think it might play out in the long run. Yeah.
Thanks. You actually validated my thinking. Thanks. It is cyclical, right? Okay. Performance measurement. Okay. I know this is something that is very tangential to the work you do, and you've even done a lot of validity studies around this. As a space, right? If we think about where we're going with technology, we are woefully unsophisticated as business society in order to actually correlate the value of these new human abilities we're going to be coveting to workplace performance, right? And to make it worse, each business has its own idea about what performance measurement should be. which limits what I call portability for an employee. And so if an employee isn't supposed to be at a company for very long these days, because they're not, they move from one place, you take a product manager at two companies, same industry, manage completely different. You go from one to the next and you're like almost starting from ground zero. Yeah. So what do you think the future performance measurement needs to look like for this all to happen?
So the future performance measurement is probably a novel that someone could, but I would start with one of the things that I think there has been positive movement in is just the idea of goal-oriented performance management. And in doing so, it's really an interactive, goal-oriented approach where when I say interactive, employees and managers and leaders are setting goals flexibly, staying connected, checking in often, reorienting goals. But at the end of the day, if you could say, look, this person who had an active role in their own performance management, so they weren't a cog in the machine, they weren't out of control, someone didn't lay baloney stuff on them, set these goals. These goals were also changed here and here. So they either accomplished what they set out for or they didn't at some level of scale. Like, again, can't be just one person across 3 months isn't enough. But if you could do that, I think at scale in a company and really attain goal attainment that's not placed upon a person. So self-directed to some degree, it still has to serve the organization, because otherwise you might set goals like, I have a goal to take 2 days off of work this month. And you're like, that's not. So I believe that a goal-based approach that's really a shared performance management system within an organization is a way to think about the future. And I think companies are trying to do this, but unfortunately, I also think that they try to combine too many goals at once. They want their OKRs to cascade down.
Yeah.
They want to put a number on things. So they for compensation decisions. Once it's compensation related, guess what? Everybody gets a little political and a little weird because if you didn't hit your goals, then I can't give you a raise, but you need to change your goals to be less. I think agnostic of a lot of things, a goal-based shared approach, performance management could be a really strong way to build almost a resume of goal attainment.
Yeah.
And that would be something, you mentioned the idea of portability. If you could have almost an agnostic type of recording of this, an agnostic that was like, what did you say you'd do? And did you do it? And on time and whatever else, you could use something like that fairly effectively to understand who's a performer and who isn't.
Almost as a way to attempt standardization.
To attempt it.
Yeah. And that was going to be my next question, is we have ONET, which is like the job description standard, the summary of the job. But from what I can tell, there's really no movement to standardize performance.
No. I think if you wanted to standardize performance, you'd look to something like the B Corp movement or an outside firm that's almost, yes, they'll probably want to do it for money because they're going to sell this back in some LinkedIn. But it has to be a third-party agnostic approach that would say, we ask the questions, we set how it's measured, and we do a fair appraisal based on these conditions. I think that if you look at other areas, even buying a car and the things that are miles that people have driven on it, dings, that there are enough ways you could envision valuation of an employee, but it needs to be, at least would be a third party that would really need to be looking at it from how do we fairly do this in any kind of organization, any kind of role, or at least most roles. And so back to the goal-based approach, if you used a goal-based approach and it was externally managed, you could get a pretty good sense of a badge of minor goals. This person hit 32 out of 33 for the year, taking into account changes in goals. That's good. Major goals, company aligned goals. You could have different levels and stuff, but you could, I believe, get a decent, not perfect view of it with that kind of objective measure versus would you rehire this person?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like as soon as you start to ask managers or leaders to put in their subjectiveness of it, it's going to fall apart. So that's where I always think like a goal-based, now there's still subjectivity in a goal-based approach, but what you would hope is if a third party was really running it, they could decouple yes, no questions.
Absolutely.
Versus
thanks. I now have the second business I want to go start. Since we're at time, I have one question for you. One more question, because this is going to be a really easy one. So in talking about value and value creation, how would you help someone process what's the value of a human in the work context?
What is the value of a human in the work context? It's a really challenging question because I think that there is the individual and then there is the individual's impact on others, the network effect that an individual has. I think that when you go to the individual side of it directly, ultimately, they are serving some aspect of some kind of production of something somewhere. And there has to be an accounting for where in the production of a service or a good their role plays and what their numerical value is to attaining that. And it may sound, I don't really know the equation for that. I think the unfortunate part with that, though, is because I think that's very doable. I think it's been done. I probably should read more IO psychology stuff from the past, but there's a lot of work done around the ROI of individuals and performance. And I think where it gets more challenging is, so you could imagine that you have one value metric that's like really more scientific. The other side, though, is the part that I think is more difficult, which is what is that person's impact on your company, on the people they work with outside of their job. So in the IO world, the early days, it was the idea of task performance, and then there was contextual performance. Task performance was much more easy to assign value to because it was about doing your job. And then if you take it upline, it's I'm an SDR, I do X turns into Y, Y turns into this sale that gives us money to build this and to market this. Like you can create the value of the employee in that direction. Contextual performance has a very different impact. What is the impact of helping someone? What's the impact of being nice when someone's having a bad day? What's the impact of leadership behavior when you're not a leader? When you step up and people had heard a piece of news and instead of saying, yeah, as usual, we're being screwed, you stop and say, if you think about the challenges the company's facing, it makes some sense. What are the value of those things? And I think that's the part that I don't have an answer for, which is there's the very human component to their contribution to the greater culture that gets lost. And ultimately, it's measurable at a group level. If you look at group engagement or work experience, one person can suck the life out. But what's hard to see is how does a couple of people add value to that team? And then what does that team's value when those two people have done the right things add to two other teams? And what are those two other teams? You know, and if you think about it, even as an idea that starts here, that goes here, that gets to another person, that gets spruced up a little, then it's presented over here and two people run with that idea in two different teams. And all of a sudden it takes on a life of its own as a new business idea or a better way to treat people or whatever. Finding that level of how to turn that into a number or to really figure that out is beyond me. But that's where I think in the measurement side, it gets lost. Is easy to talk about kind of role contribution, task contribution, not super easy, but easier. But talking about contextual contribution, what does it mean when you're nice to someone for 3 days in a row and it puts a little more energy in their step? It means a lot. So maybe the best way is if you were doing this, I'm just thinking this out loud, but if I were going to create a metric of employee value, one might be a more financially oriented one tied to a metric of their role and how it applies. The secondary metric that would have to be on there would be, for lack of a better term, a culture contribution metric. And that might be, and culture is a nebulous thing, but as a term of the other things a person does throughout their lifetime with a company that impacts people in non-task specific ways. So it could mean they're helping them with a task, but it could mean that they help them with their well-being by just being nice. It could be because they took charge of a group of people who were rudderless. They calmed down some conflict. There would be some other metric that's that culture contribution. And then maybe the two would come together. And then the final question would be is which one is more important than the other? And arguably, I think the culture one often is, but it's really hard to businesses don't do a great job, as you are probably aware of, really, and I think people analytics is helping here, but really putting a dollar value on culture. And in doing so, it's one of the reasons that people ask the questions like, do I really need to survey every year? And you're like, if you put culture as a non-fundamental part of your business, that might be your answer already. That you're not turning it into you don't realize the value that these combined energies create in your organization.
As you were saying that, it just makes me think about it just in sports, like on-field percentage, right? It's like just by being a player on the field, right?
Yep.
Contributes to the team's success in some way, shape, or form, whether or not you were the one who actually had the ball or any control at that moment in time, your contribution. There are some players that have crazy on the field percentages and don't have individual stats, right? So
that's in hockey, because I'm a big hockey fan. That's the same. They have a stat just like that. It's they don't do the big goals. They don't do they're not making the big defensive plays. They just do everything right in between that enables the high performers to perform at their best. And I think that the tricky part is when you add in the social components. Whereas in sports, there aren't that many. There is that person who's, let's go do it, boys. But when you put into a work world, the amount of complexity around the social side of an organization, that's the hard to measure stuff. Whereas the task stuff is easier to measure, but probably one of the reasons that companies don't succeed when they have great talent is because they haven't put enough effort on the other side.
Greg, this has been amazing.